Hi.
Harry, Tammy.
Morning.
Morning. Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, great.
Cancel.
I'll just be a quick second.
Volume 1.
You're packed with gadget over there, I think, Sam.
That's a Amazon Echo. Are you familiar with that device?
I heard about it. Much about it.
You're in Antwerp?
I see it.
Are you
No,
in
I live
Antwerp?
in Eindhoven in the Netherlands now. I moved.
Eindhoven, okay.
Yes.
What's the weather in Eindhoven?
Right now in Camino Island, it's 42 degrees.
Cancel. You got the wrong city. Volume 3. What's the weather in Eindhoven?
I couldn't find a forecast for that location.
Too bad.
How's your pronunciation of Eindhoven?
Eindhoven?
Eindhoven? Could I talk to this machine or not?
Volume 5. Go ahead. Say Alexa and then whatever you want to say.
Okay. Alexa, what is the weather in Eindhoven?
Let me turn it up. Try again.
Alexa, what is the weather in Eindhoven?
It doesn't recognize your voice. Alexa, oh, sorry. I made a mistake.
That's okay.
Cancel. Okay. Try again.
Alexa,
There is nothing
what is the weather in Eindhoven?
It's too stupid. Sorry.
Okay, nice gadget though.
I'm too stupid to use it correctly.
Yeah. Blame it on yourself.
That's right.
Hi, Tammy. Technology is there to serve you, not the other way around, I reckon.
What's the weather in Vancouver?
In Vancouver, Canada, it's 36 degrees Fahrenheit with mostly cloudy skies. Today, you can look for clouds and showers, with a high of 43 degrees and a low of 36 degrees.
Hopefully that was correct.
We'll see.
Okay, ask this Alexa. Hi, Gertraud. Ask your gadget what's a good way to do the barn raising today.
Alexa, how do you do barn raising?
Sorry, I don't know that.
Anyway, enough of that.
Hi, Gertraud.
Hi, people. Hello, real people.
Hi. I thought I'd come in and see what the Tuesday crowd is like.
It's quite similar to the other days.
We just start with a different question. We always seem to get to the same place, right?
We shouldn't we?
Yeah. So anybody have an interesting question?
I have the same.
Okay.
What do you got, Harry? Ooh, time's a ticking. Yes, it is.
I got the time.
Is that an egg timer?
No, it's just something I like the way it depicts time, because it's the way there's a limited amount of time feeling. And this is half an hour. I don't really use it much in a practical sense, or it's a quarter of an hour, I don't know, but I liked it. And, well, that's about it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite pleasing to watch, I have to say.
Yes. When I use it, I look at it and it's always empty on the top side, though. I forget time.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to start creating some frames that we can actually get work done more quickly. And yeah, land on our purpose and make our offerings and figure out how to weave those together in our sessions.
Hey, Doug. Doug didn't have to materialize today.
How do you like that?
Maybe that's to come.
Practice makes perfect. That's it.
So, Tammy, you mentioned the purpose. Do you have any more specifics?
Well, I would like to just trying to figure out how to. I have some offers. I know you all have some offers. I'd like to be able to start progressing our work more specifically. And we've got a lot on the table, so it's for me. It's just about focusing our attention and choosing our direction and going for it. There's a just do it element to where I'm at in life generally, and definitely here.
Well, I have a starting question. Let's see if we can seed this initially. My question has to do with, given that we're building barns and putting up sides of barns, what would that look like from an outsider's point of view? What would it look like for us to be doing that? And what would they see coming out of these discussions?
I think that's for us to decide and figure out. Like
That's exactly the question I was trying to ask. Yeah.
And so for me, it's more about as internal as us. What do we want to create?
To me, that's the same. What we want to create is what we want to offer the world, or not.
Yes.
So that's basically an offer towards the outside public. To me, it's the same.
So do people want to go around that, or shall we start diving into that?
Well, I commented already. Well, to me, I see no difference between what Tammy and Sam propose, and I think this is barn raising. So, and it fit nicely to where I am. Okay, we've been talking a lot. We get a kind of feeling what everybody is about. Still do not know exactly, and we're looking for solutions to have large scale collaboration in a certain way. And how do we go about that? And I learned a lot myself, and I think, okay, what people looking at the GCC are probably waiting for is, what do they mean for us? How do I have any advantage or any from that? And that's kind of customer perspective, of course, because that's where it starts, and that's fine with me. But one of my what I would like to say to the world is, okay, if you want to collaborate with us, you have to kind of do stuff yourself as well. With that, I'm complete for the moment.
Doug, Gertraud?
Before we go on, Harry, can you elaborate on what you mean you got to do stuff yourself?
Well, you can just not lean back and be consumer and maybe throw some money at me and just then be served by Harry.
Thanks. Gertrude, you wanted to say something? I jumped in.
Gertraud is putting her toe in the water to see what this barn raising thing's all about.
Okay, so I'd like to pick up the thread from where we last left off at our last barn raising. Because what we had arrived at and gotten to was sort of a threshold issue. And it has to do with the underlying intention of each individual contributor vis-a-vis what's being built. And in terms of the what's being built, just to sort of put a stake in the ground, my vision of that and framing of that is sort of the platform that everybody wants and wishes they had that doesn't exist yet. So it's the greatest, grandest vision of that as a mashup of technology, virtual convening and collaboration space, collective tools, back-end invisible automation and services and functionalities designed to facilitate each where and how they live and how they prefer to help and contribute and what they bring. So that's the it for me in terms of what at least my understanding was of the barn raising sessions. I tend to be a greatest, grandest kind of guy in these kinds of exercises from the standpoint of not taking pieces of the elephant, but looking at it holistically and trying to get arms around the greatest possible extrapolation of what I just described and what that would look like, what its functionalities are, what its affordances are, what the requirements are of it, the demands and expectations to be placed on it, as mediated by sort of some fundamental starting assumptions. So those I sort of place loosely under the category and heading of values. So the first value that I carry and hold in this endeavor, which was sort of where we left off last conversation, was what is my intention, orientation toward this collaborative effort from a contribution standpoint, from an ownership or lack of ownership thereof, from an attribution standpoint, and from a values flow standpoint in terms of any potential downstream opportunities or emergences related to pieces of or the whole that map to commercialization or revenue generation of derived from the value created by the collective, by the collaboration. And my orientation and value around that is I'm interested in rolling up sleeves and getting together with a group of people, all for one for all, contributing without any expectation of return or quid pro quo, and without any ego attachment from the standpoint of attribution, branding, naming, or other. So I don't bring with that any sort of preconceived or expectation-based imposition on it in terms of naming, in terms of credit, in terms of ownership. Another dimension of that, and part of the rationale for that, is that I'm an attorney. And so the predicate of intellectual property law, and which is based on proprietary ownership and control over things created, and as an expression and extension of scarcity and power and authority, is a paradigm that I am also committed to not perpetrating going forward in what I do. It's important to me that in the context of this particular project and build, that it not be afflicted with that baggage. And I just want to add a qualification, and then I'll stop because I don't mean to run. But the dimension of attribution, meaning things that I may have authored or collaborated in the creation of as a case of first impression, I do believe that sort of connecting and tagging of the individual responsible for sourcing or contributing downstream on a collective aggregation basis, their identity being connected with the thing that was contributed is important. And that I do extrapolate and believe there needs to be a dimension of the system to be built that enables flows of value back to individual contributors, participants, in some way, shape, or form, to be determined. But at this stage of the game, I'm less concerned about that in connection with this project in particular than I am with making my contribution and getting the show on the road and starting to flesh out a picture in service to getting something built. So that's out there as a sort of statement of Doug first principles, and a jumping off point for a very concrete discussion about where are people at, how do we agree, not agree, on board, not on board, etc., as a underlying value agreement.
So one of the last memes I think I left off with in the last session was this notion that, for me, almost the only value that matters is coexistence. That to try and stack individuals' values up and try and come up with some kind of community set of values or community prioritization of values seems to me a never-ending conversation. And that what's important is to recognize that if we're really building this system for everyone, and if this system, including all the human practices and protocols for everyone, then part of that needs to recognize that all of us have different prioritizations of values. And if that cannot be afforded, then again, we're in a losing game. So to me, I would toss in there as almost the number one principle into this conversation is coexistence. Over.
Yeah, first, as Tammy said, I want to put my big toe into this conversation, so I'm not, I haven't seen the others, so, but me, I would like to tell a story about something that happened to my brother or my brother's friend, to say my controversial position in that. I completely agree with what Doug said. This, like, I don't want this, I give this much into it and I want to have this much out of it. That doesn't work. I mean, this is really coming from scarcity. And that story is, on the other side, my brother is an anesthetician or a medical doctor who's putting people to sleep. And he was working with a professor in Sao Paulo about a machine that does the shows you what's going on in the lung. And then an American came and was very interested and was 2 days in that laboratory and very nice. And then he went back and did a patent out of it. And so they couldn't use it anymore. Exactly that part. And I mean, they felt cheated. but they were not so much concerned that they didn't have that patent, but that they couldn't use it anymore. And I think that's an important part, that we create something that is usable by everyone and not just somebody taking it out and then said, that's my proprietary part, even though they didn't do it. So that's my concern. And to find like the Creative Commons or whatever that might be, to have something where it stays usable for people. So that's what came to my mind when I listened to you.
The nice thing is when it's in the open, it cannot be stolen, because it's already out there. It's open source, and everything we do here, and Doug probably knows more about it now, well, is authored by us, so we kind of could claim authority somewhere.
Well, two quick thoughts. One is the purest open source license, I think pioneered by Richard Stallman way back in the 60s or 70s, is something called the GPL, and it's referred to as a viral because anything it touches must by necessity be open source and therefore not ownable and not profitable. There is a lesser form, Doug knows this, where anyone is able to use it and in fact even incorporate it into their products, but is not allowed to actually make money from it. And that any alterations to it still need to be put back into the open source. And then there's, of course, lesser forms of that don't necessarily require that revisions be put back into the open source. But I want to at least say that there's a spectrum of open source practice, and that we're probably not yet clear where we're really focusing on. I'm not sure yet, Doug, whether you're promoting the GPL, which is the most viral form, or some form that allows us to still maintain attribution, let anyone use it, but not necessarily make money from it. I'm probably more in that camp, okay? Or whether there's lesser forms of that. So I just wanted to introduce that spectrum of usage in the open source practice.
I would like to hear everybody's stance at this point on this matter. That's very interesting. I can state mine. I'm a GPL guy.
I'd like to evolve and innovate on the types of what has been known as copyright. I think that the limitation in terms of revenue generation is a artifact of the scarcity consciousness and doesn't need to be there. I think that we can create and evolve what that looks like. And my interest is obviously in creating knowledge artifacts that are not at all scarce. In fact, there's an explosion of that going on in our networks and our groups. And so for me, it's about evolving the realization of value within that on a number of different metrics that may also include currency, whether digital or fiat. So I think I want to see this kind of work supported. I think that there's a real world element and aspect to what it is that we're doing that does require flows of resources, and that we need to talk about that, and we need to look at what that actually looks like in terms of, you know, I'm definitely an open source person. All of my work, I do my best to show people exactly how I'm doing it so that others can pick it up and take up the practices. And the value that's generated from distributing knowledge assets is as yet not fully realized. And so I'd like to, for me, it's not just about open source, and I don't find that the Creative Commons or the other agreements and ways that we do open source is quite evolved enough, and I'd like us to consider how we can extend what that is, because we're creating value, and I think that we have a lot of good work that we can do in making that real. A lot to say in this area. But I'll cede the mic.
I heard you a lot about this, Tammy, and I still do not get where your thoughts are different from others.
I want us to make specific agreements about revenue sharing and bring money to our projects so that we can be doing that piece as well. Because for me, it's yes, I've worked very hard to have some financial runway to be able to contribute, but I need to get paid.
Okay. It's not very open source, that's okay.
In some way. And that doesn't mean that it's not open source. I'm not, I just.
I would like to hear Doug about those differences. He's probably more.
So, remember, I'm the unlawyer. So I'm a complete frickin' anarchist. And there isn't any part of the old paradigm that I'm particularly interested in perpetrating going forward. So for everything that's been said, I agree, Tammy, with the way you framed it, which was perfect in terms of my vision alignment around this, which is we're not, the GPL and Creative Commons, I look at through a lens of they're still informed by the existing IP structures and world. They're not outside of it. They're just an extension, an attempt to extend or push boundaries based on the underlying assumptions, presumptions, and values embedded in the old paradigm. And so I think there are dimensions and elements that may be, grist for learning or begging, borrowing, stealing, or modifying or varying, but I don't see that as required either. I think we have the ability to co-create how we want to relate to this and how we want to work. And I'm also like a really big fan of figuring out how to pay bills. I'm also equally clear that the traditional ways of doing that in this kind of endeavor suck and are also contaminated and inflicted with the old paradigm of sucking on the patronage of the foundations and the philanthropies and the corporate gift giving and the wealthy and the whatever. And it's not a judgment on any of those folks or those organizations or entities. It's a judgment on the form. It either suffers from project to project mentalities that are industrial in nature, not providing any kind of sustenance between projects for the underlying people and organization that are attempting to do not-for-profit and good works, or it suffers from self-indulgence where the money is really defining and controlling the exercise, whether they're competent to or know how to do that, have a rational basis, as opposed to an ego basis or a vanity basis for what they're choosing to fund, why, and how much control and stirring of the soup they want to do or not. So I have issues with all of the old paradigm, not just parts of it. And I really firmly believe we have unlimited generative potential to create new, and to figure out a different way of approaching all of this. I want to get to a share of what some of the elements of that might be, but Sam, I want to leave room for interjection so I don't commit to you what I committed heinously on Tammy when she wanted to interject and I ran over her. So,
well, let me do a quick question, because it's very easy to say reject the entire old paradigm, but intertwined, I think probably at the base of this, is this notion of ownership. Do we believe in ownership of any kind? Do we believe in that something is allocated in some way? Because I think that's fundamental. If we don't believe in ownership, then I think a lot of what you're saying might be possible. If we believe in ownership in any way, then we got to look at what ownership implies and then sort of build up structures on top of this notion of ownership, even though it may be different. So that is my fundamental question is, what is ownership?
I will confess that I do not believe in ownership of anything. That if we don't shift to a non-ownership paradigm, we're dead, along with every other living thing on this planet. So
go for it, Gertraud, and then I'd like to go.
For me, there's more an energetic thing to talk about source, who is the source of it, that I stand on the shoulders of whomever, like in appreciative inquiry, that it's David Cooperrider who created it and not me. So I'm very sensitive to people that claim what they didn't do, and I would rather say to honor the source, not about ownership. Who owns what? Like David Cooperrider, who said, "I'm not owning appreciative inquiry." So he left it open and didn't claim it and didn't put an R behind it. But everybody who's a decent person says he is the one who created it. And for me, that's more important than this notion of who possesses what. And to get a possibility to, a recommendation to say, let's honor the sources of what we are doing. And maybe we want to be honored for what we created.
So in terms of the commons, which is, for me, if there was a body that is owner of what is being created, it's the commons. And I just think that there's a bridge from here to there. There's a bridge from the world that we're in right now to a world where the commons is thriving and supported and understood and realized as valuable. And so the idea that I've shared very briefly about in terms of decorporation is a process of looking at how we have evolved our corporate systems, and to initiate a shift, and one of the ways that I would see to do that is that this series of systems that we want to contribute to as our small group, and I would say that this is happening all over the world, and so we will need to be linking up with others that are also doing these things, that that it's owned by people, that it's a human being. This is the part that I think makes sense and grounds what it is that we're doing in a way that's important to do as a bridge. So what I would like to have us explore, and to explore specifically with you, Doug, is what would be a new kind of body, a collective body that, I mean, I'm calling it a D corporation, right? That gives every human being access to these commons tools. And I think that because we are in the world that we're in right now, that we could frame that ownership is for every human being on the planet, which gives every human being with a heartbeat a stake in what is created, which is right relationship to my mind. And I would like for this to be not, because every time I've brought it up, all I've gotten is pushback, not questions to understand. And so I'm looking for more engagement on this, because this is really fundamental to what it is that I'm bringing and offering. And I'd like it to be taken seriously. Imagine if we posed this kind of universal human ownership of the system that we're creating. Does that not open us to a new series of considerations in terms of what's of benefit to the whole, and what's of benefit to humanity, and what kind of social and economic systems can we design from the ground up that serves us? I would like to see every human being have access to the economy as a baseline right. I think that would shift a lot. I would like for us to have easy ways to create value, which currently corporations are the realm in which value is created in the world. I would like to see every person be able to directly create value, and not have it just tied to the extractive paradigms that currently exist, but rather other metrics of value that show the holism and of what value is in the world. Those are all deep considerations. It's completely outside of the current paradigm. It's not ownership in terms of this is mine and you can't use it. It's a different type, and I think it's of value to look at what that could look like as a bridge to where we're going. I'll leave it there for now.
Tammy, do you have in your own mind a vision of what this difference looks like, what it looks like?
I think that a collective common inquiry into the creation of new economic systems that is open to all and owned by all is a whole other context under which to design, dream, consider, and make real.
Yeah, could you say more about it? Because exactly that's what's interesting to kind of see, at least for me.
Can you ask a more? I've done a lot of thinking into it. I've got a lot of pieces.
Yes, that's why it's so hard to grasp what it's about for me. I sense that, and I sense that ever since I saw you address this issue. Well, I think. Well, it's partly to do with language and definitions, I think. So I'm trying to grasp that as well. And in that aspect, the alphabet code is also very interesting. But to me, work is everything I do in order to be in balance with what I always have my needs met. And to me, work is what I do in order to do what I have to do in order to do nothing, because I prefer to do nothing. So that's work for me. So if we talk about bringing value, I do not really understand what bringing value means in your mindset. Maybe that's a start.
Yeah, for me, I think that there are many metrics of value that have been boiled down to currency in terms of how people understand it, and that's just not reality. You know, we're creating value right here, right now. And the metrics may be ephemeral or may seem ephemeral, but there is an artifact. That artifact can be put in front of people that can see it and be like, oh, that's cool. I'd like to support that. That would be another way of bringing value to this. Or, oh my gosh, I've already built that. Do you want to make that interoperable with what you guys are up to? These are all real ways to weave value. So maybe I'll come at it from a different place, okay? So what I'd like to talk to Doug about is to imagine into what kind of I mean, the corporate thing, it's not the corporate thing, but what's another way of organizing a series of agreements or whatever it is? I don't have the words around it because it actually doesn't exist yet. What's the new corporation that's not a corporation? What's the anti-corporation, right? That's what I want to create or be a part of feeding into. So here's what I want to do. I would like, Sam, you're mic'd. I want to offer the alphabet code to the world. It is a big chunk of deeply transformative value. I perceived it, but I did not create it. And I would like to be able to do the work with others, be compensated and have them compensated for doing that work, but the value go into the commons. So yes, I'd love to get paid for the work, but the actual value that's created from the alphabet code, I would contribute to this project and this process. If there was money that we could generate in this world from the alphabet code, I would be absolutely happy to contribute that to this as a way to create coherences of value. So what kind of new organization, or I mean, it's not even an organization. What kind of new designation of collective can we come up with that can support the commons, the fundaments of the commons, so that, you know, I want to contribute the alphabet code. I also want to contribute a bunch of other stuff, but that would be held by that collective body, and decision making would be made in terms of what happens with the resources generated. So, you know, what does that look like? You know, these are, you know, I want to actually hack together our own commons as an example of what it is that we're wanting to create.
What comes to mind for me is the word village.
I also have tons of URLs that are all plain language ideas that I've been carrying around that I'd love to offer to the commons. What would it be for me to, like, for us to be like, these are the things that I have to offer to the commons, and here are these resources that we can collectively manage.
I did not hear some. What word was that?
I said that the word that comes to me is village.
And then we need to know what we're all bringing to the table, right? Like we're at this late date, still kind of sketchy on the things that we each bring. And that's, yes, part of what we need to build, but it's still a bit of a gap.
It may be I'm still slow, but I still am wrapped up around this notion of ownership. When we talk about IP, I think that we can talk about IP being freed up from ownership in a way that's different than finite resources. And we can argue about whether resources are infinite or finite, but we have many dimensional lives. We consume air, water, paper, etc. Those are only a few of the systems and flows. There are many that don't have as vast a volume of resources, even though they're rapidly diminishing. Some of them, silicon is quite plentiful. Some of them, uranium may not be. So I don't think that it's realistic to think about everything being unowned and apparently infinite. I know you didn't say that, but I know that if we think about, eliminating this notion of ownership, then we really, really have to have a different notion of what it means to really live and to really be, each of us, sustainable and then thrivable and anti-resilient. Anti-fragile. So I really want to make sure that if we're really talking about the extreme of open source in the IP sense, we really have to be careful about whether that really translates to more physical resources as well. I think that it's just prudent to do so. Over.
I would like to stay close to Tammy's question. Tammy, I feel two things when I listen to you, and this is checking. You have this urge to bring what you have to the world, and I share that with you. I think that's one thing. And then there's the other part that kind of makes it a problem, that you also have your needs that need to get met in order for you to progress with whatever you want to do. And I think you translate that to being paid or rewarded. And I think that I would like to expand on that maybe because that might be a simplification in the old paradigm. I see Doc nodding. So Doc, could you respond, please?
Okay. Do you want me to start with where you left off, or do you want me to do some unpacking, or either or? You're open. Okay.
Whatever helps, but I'm focusing around I see Tammy really suffering with this.
Understood.
Make sure it's not just Tammy, okay?
And yeah, I just want to put out that, this is a broader problem.
I know, but you're a good example, my dear.
Yeah, take me as an example. I like to eat every day.
Exactly, that's it. Me too, as well.
Okay, so let me unpack some of this in terms of how I hear it. I have my time and attention and ability to contribute value. Underlying that, I have my discretion. I have unqualified, unlimited control and authority over where I choose to place my attention and make contributions. So that's my generative potential as a human being of one. And I don't connect that linearly in a reciprocal or quid pro quo construct to getting something back in return for it. So the fundamental of something for something in terms of industrial fiat currency, paying bills, earning money, quote, work for money, exchange, I see as the problem, not the solution. So I'm committed to figuring out what that gets replaced with, number one. Number two, I'm not delusional that decoupling giving and receiving doesn't mean I don't need to receive. Need to receive. But my needs and how I receive, how value flows back to me, doesn't necessarily have to be connected or linked to the value I contribute in the world in whatever way, shape, form, or context, unless I choose to make that linkage, unless that's my choice. I choose to give something for something. Consistent with the principle that I get exactly what I ask for. I create my reality every day. If I choose to live a quid pro quo reality around working and making money, then I am playing the system I look outside my window and detest for what it's done to our world and our species. I play that forward through my eyes. That's sort of my judgment. So I'd rather die than do that, than continue to contribute to that.
Can I just have a quick interjection in that I have been doing that practice for years.
Understood.
This nonlinear value creation.
Understood. It's a different. Let me take it one step at a time, because the unpacking is important, I think, in terms of figuring out where the real meat and potatoes is in this, right? So if I don't want to do it on an exchange basis, I have to figure out another way of doing it. For 3 decades, I gave away millions of dollars worth of services and millions of dollars worth of money went through my hands because I didn't understand the existing system and I didn't set up any mechanism or recognize or accept or acknowledge the fact that I was worth getting paid. Bottom line. If I was antagonistic in relation to money and people with wealth, and I did not believe I deserved wealth, then the reality I was going to create was poverty. And I did that. I was like really successful and consistent. I generated millions. It went right through me. Got that. Now, when the money was gone and I decoupled from bricks and mortar and things on a values basis, I said, might be a good idea to learn about money. There's got to be another way of relating to it. Out from under antagonisms, out from under issues of my own self-worth. And I learned up about how you relate to money, how you treat money, respect money, how you deal with it responsibly, make it grow, and all this stuff. Great. If I believe our salvation is dependent upon a commons construct, all for one, one for all, and that's not just humans in relation to humans, that's humans in relation to the biome and humans in relation to our planet and every living thing in it and on it, as one pot, then the best thing I could figure out how to do was to contribute value in whatever ways, in as many opportunities and contexts as possible. From a place of choice. So Gertrude, I have a dozen stories of your son's experience. Now, fact of the matter is I cast people to be on the receiving end of what I was contributing who were going to rip me off because I made that choice. It wasn't conscious, but that's what I was doing. Benefit of hindsight. You know, choose better people to show my crap to. I'm not going to get ripped off. I'm going to be valued and appreciated. 100% of my reality is under my control. Okay. So I want to unpack, Tammy, pieces. So in the context of you and the expressions of you in terms of where you create value or where you have value to bring or offer, I opened your and my relationship, one-on-one relationship with, you know, some things occurred to me and I just sort of did a download, right? You got this and this and this and this and this, and how are you doing you? And I can help with that, like sort and sift and separate. There are things that lend themselves to existing organizational structure patterns, use cases. Not-for-profits, for-profits, letter corps, whatever, that are sort of easy. Like you structure them up. One of the specialties in my law practice was helping not-for-profits set up for-profit alter egos as a way of licking that funding nightmare and create a sustainable channel of revenue to support the organization between projects and harvest commercializable things from the not-for-profit work they were doing and spin those off in service to generating money. So lots of creative things around that. And the alphabet code, you know, lends itself to that kind of sort of structuring and packaging and setup. And a distinction, and Gertrude's example was perfect. Attribution, credit, I value and I consider critical and important. I don't correlate credit and attribution with ownership. And obviously the person that Gertraud referred to didn't either. He didn't seek to productize his creation. He sought to bring it to the world. There are other people that do the opposite. They proprietize everything they create. They brand the crap out of it. Then they make as much money as humanly possible until they come up with the next brilliant idea that they brand and package and sell. So choice, it's just choices. So on the micro level, Tammy has a gift to give the world in the form of the alphabet code, and how most effectively could we approach that and set that up in service to maximum exposure and dissemination, but also in service to maximum sustainability, thrivability, you know, and resource generation. Now that resource generation, if you're not in a quid pro quo construct, doesn't mean it's binary. It means you could generate lots of success and then figure out, how do you want to distribute resources? How do you want to spread that around or not? So that's all choice, and structures, expressed organizational structures, business structures, and whatever are, you know, in service to your vision for how you want to play, not the other way around, if that makes sense. So, and that speaks directly to that straddle thing that you mentioned about there's the future state we would have, but there's this transition time in existing structures. So, you know, they provide and afford a means to play in the existing world, but use discretion about how you want to play behind the brands and the organizations and names in terms of resource flow, value flow, which could be money, but it can also be people. It can also be, you know, all sorts of things. There are an infinite number of ways of generating value, supporting, promoting value, catalyzing value generation. Okay. On the bigger construct, in terms of this idea of the corporation of man, a corporation is the poster child, structurally, of ownership, scarcity.
What's a D corporation? What's the unpinning of that?
Well, the point is there isn't a way to, you can put makeup on a pig, but a pig is a pig. A corporation is a corporation. And there's no such thing as a corporation without ownership. There are not-for-profit corporations, and they're not technically owned.
I want to go deeper there.
Deeper where? I mean, there's no deeper there. A corporation is a entity where the ownership is reflected in equity in the form of stock, and shareholders own the stock, and they appoint the board of directors, and the board of directors hire the officers, and it's the tool of the capitalist system, and it's authorized by the state and designed to shield the people behind it from liability or responsibility for the crap they do in service to making money. It's like the ugliest, gnarliest feature of the old paradigm.
If we were to think into, I'm asking us specifically to think into how we can deconstruct the corporation and create something else that's in service to the commons. I'm calling it a decorporation because I'm literally naming it.
Here's the language you used, and this is the problem. You said, create this ownership structure to give everybody in the world. I'm going to stop there. Who's giving what to who? Who's giving what to who? Who the fuck am I to give anybody anything? They're entitled, period. Not because I give it to them, or a bunch of elites give it to them, or a bunch of bankers give it to them, or the World Bank gives it to them. They're just frickin', they're entitled to their slice of the pie. It's not a matter of what's real today. It's a matter of what's the world we want to create. And if I can't envision a new that isn't based on a human being requiring somebody else to give them anything, then we're going over the cliff. We're dead. Not next generation or 2 generations. We're dead, like possibly within our time, although my lifespan is shortened. But as a practical matter, our generation may not see the end of the day if things continue at the rate they're going. So bottom line, there's no salvation in any construct. The minute you bring in, you invite give to the party, it means there's somebody giving and there's somebody receiving, and you're playing the path forward. We're back in the industrial paradigm and nothing's changed. And you can dress it up and rename it and value it and do all sorts of crap and fancy stuff to it. But at the end of the day, it's afflicted by the old paradigm.
I don't agree.
I get that.
Hey, Doug, can I try something? Let's imagine a world that's full of different flows. Money flows if you want to posit money, but certainly there's water flows, energy flows, goods flows, food flows, whatever, okay? So if you think in terms of whenever something goes from the supermarket to your house, there's a source and then there's a destination. So I don't just say I'm entitled and it just shows up, right? There's some mechanism. So whether you call that delivery, whether you call that receiving, whether you call that giving, there's something going on. And unless I say I need some butter, it's not going to show up. Right? I have to specify a need, and something's got to bring it to me. So I think there's a larger sense of where sources of flows are and where sinks of flows could be. I could source something as well and then deliver it to someone else, right? So if you want to eliminate this word called ownership, there's still decision making. There's still the mechanism and logistics of how all of this works. And something's got to operate that. A set of agreements or a set of technologies or a government or a commons or a village or a group of elders. Something's got to set that up. Now, so the point I'm getting to is ownership, to me, is almost diametrically opposite, but tied intimately with this notion of decision making.
It has been.
We have to make, well, no, decisions have to get made.
Well, ownership plus decision making is about power, authority, control, and scarcity.
In the old paradigm.
Decisions.
What Tammy is asking, and what I'm also asking is, can we think of a different way of ownership and decision making, where we're now thinking ownership is less about the value you create for the man, but it's more about something that we share together. I'm not yet ready to use the word entitlement. I'm not yet ready to use the word rights, but there is flow that's required. There is logistics that required, and that requires decision making. And I have to be able to say, I'm going to send this 4-pound stick of butter to Tammy in Vancouver, and it's going to cost some amount of energy with some amount of, vehicle that's going to have to be used to get there. So that decision has to get made. So ownership and decision are intricately linked, and we can't answer one without the other.
Well, hold on. Where did ownership factor into what you just described? Do you have to own the butter in order to send it to her, or do you simply have to?
Someone has to be able to make this decision about the butter. That's what I'm saying. Okay? In other words, if I decide, here's a 4-pound stick of butter, okay? If I decide that it's going to Tammy, and at the same time, Harry decides it's going to Gertraud, that inherently is a problem solved by ownership. So we have to do a problem.
Yes, and is that the proper way to solve this problem?
There are many possible ways to solve that problem.
Now let's discuss those ways.
Exactly. That's what we're trying to figure out.
My whole point is, put ownership aside. How do we do it differently?
Right.
And if we look at it from a standpoint of flows and needs, the important thing in Tammy's reality from a flow back standpoint is needs. She needs to make money.
Right. Let's
make money. You need to make money. I need to make money. Harry needs to make money. It's not, what if it's not make money? What if it's not make money? What if it's receive money as a flow, as part of a larger ecosystem of value flows? And currencies, in the Arthur Brock sense, okay, is enabling an abstraction of various values, okay, to be exchanged into flow within that system.
There's still ownership there.
There's still ownership there.
Right. I thought Arthur has abolished the idea of ownership, right?
Sam, could I ask you a question? Do you think ownership is a necessary part of the solution?
Ownership is another way of saying who decides.
Yes, and is that necessary part of the solution in your...
Yes, because something has to decide. Decisions have to get made. Flows have to be controlled. Flows have to be tweaked, Valves have to get turned,
But
Gauges need to be put in place.
Yes.
So decisions is another way of talking about ownership. And those are intricately connected. And we got to figure out who's making these decisions. If we're going to say, not use the word ownership, we still have to ask who's making these decisions.
Okay. Who decides is also
exactly.
Okay, exactly. Agreed on that. I agree on that, Sam.
Yes.
But that still doesn't give me the answer, because my stance, let me just interject, is that I think I have the right to do what I want, so I can give. But I do not have the right to take from you. I don't think I can take, and I could, of course, end up in a fight and do the power thing, but that's kind of the thing we try to manage at this point. We try to give everybody get everybody's needs met without needing to fight over it. And we have been trying that for centuries, and we fail it all the time. Okay? So if I say to myself, and it's just, I'm trying to word it for myself as well, I think me as Harry, here and now, do not have the right to take just anything I want. I do have the right to do anything I want, unless I harm somebody else. So if I combine those two, then I think, how do I get my needs met without getting into the rabbit hole of ownership, leadership, and power struggles and all that? And I think that firstly, it's a very hard nut to crack on a global scale, and we need to act locally. So the decisions of who gets what needs to be done on a local scale, on a human scale. So within my village, my tribe, my group, so to speak. And then I have the image of like a tribe around the fire, and we have what we have to share in the middle, and say, okay, this is what we have, and we kind of have a notion of what everybody needs, and we share it together, literally. So I think the decision is not something done by somebody, but by the group. With that, I'm complete for the moment. Thank you.
How is that different from what the kibbutzim tried to do and kind of failed?
Why did they fail? There are kibbutz that did not fail because they stayed on their principles.
I like the word stewardship and I'd like to explore that as different from ownership.
I like the village elders notion.
And those kids, they got some important things to say too.
Yes, listen to the kids, but don't let them decide who gets what.
I think there's something that has at least historically been conflated with this sort of domain, and it maps to politics, control, authority, and power. And even in the most aspirational hearts of the earliest kibbutzim, I think within those systems, there was still ultimately a higher authority, which was the state. And the power, control, authority paradigm, we come by it really naturally, right? Base of the brain. It's like it came first before we got all the fancy big gray stuff that sits on top of all of that. But the gray stuff on top of that has the ability to conceive of a moment of decision and choice that that paradigm doesn't serve us now. It served when it served, how it served, and it got us this far, but it doesn't serve us now. And if we can't replace that and transcend that, we're goners. And stewardship for me, Tammy, has embedded in it the same authority over. We've been, quote, stewarding resources and wildlife and into the ground. Our best efforts every time we attempted to, quote, steward, animal populations was devastating on an ecosystemic basis. Every exercise of power, control, and authority in the history of the human species has ended in failure.
Except the indigenous ones.
They didn't live from a place of power, authority, and control. They lived from a place of part of and within the whole.
But they had village elders.
They did have, they had village elders, but village elders at least my, I have no pretension of being an authority in indigenous and primitive cultures, and tribal cultures, but village elders didn't. My understanding historically is they didn't exercise authority. They aligned with and represented the collective will. Even if that meant a chief went into battle with warriors that he said, under no circumstances can we win this fight. But he said, if that's your decision and your choice, then I'm your leader and I will lead you. And so even in that context, elders were repositories of of collective knowledge and wisdom and legacy experience and awareness and connection. But indigenous tribes were really harmonized on so many levels in terms of aggregation of individual and collective intention, will, decision, choice, right down to the most challenging things that face our culture today in terms of sexual identity, in terms of men and women, in terms of child rearing, in terms of harmony with nature. I mean, there isn't one dimension where they came from a place of other or separation from the world around them and the biome around them.
I made a face at primitive because I think that ancient cultures were definitely not primitive because, we're looking at, anyway, I just had to put that in.
Primitive through our current Western lens, that was the rational justification for our slaughtering them. And the church and Descartes,
let's skip the side.
the separation of us from nature, which came out of the church and came out of Descartes. And, like, this whole thing is about power, authority, and control. We were going to tame nature. We've been raping our planet ever since.
Does any of you have a kind of clear picture where we should end? Because I get it in the intuition that you have a lot of thoughts about it, and I see we risk battling and trying to convince each other. That's a waste of time, and I would like to hear something more constructive.
Well, I'd like to ask one more question. There's two scenarios. Let me just be extreme. One scenario is we fix whatever it is we're trying to fix, and we can still ride our collective capability into the future. And by that, what I mean is we can still eradicate disease. We can still look at, building more sustainable compounds for ourselves. We can learn how to share food more equitably. So there's that scenario. Call that scenario A. There's a second scenario, which is we all just coexist. We don't need very much. We don't need very much space. We don't need very much energy. We don't go on, expensive cruise vacations. We don't take jet planes, every week to go to conferences. That's a different scenario. And I think there is a qualitative difference in the kinds of solutions we want. If we want A versus if we want B. Now, clearly, those are not the only two choices. I'm just indicating those as extremes. Now, if we just want to return to a kind of village-like feel, and that's not necessarily what I'm supporting, by the way, then scenario B is we're all in a very minimalist, need state. We don't procreate so that we all have 9 children. And we live within our means, we grow our own food, that's one set of scenarios. The other is we figure out how to provide everybody what everybody needs, and that's still a big question. But we also have such excess that we can still put a person on Mars if we want to. We can still put space stations up in orbit. We can still put people, into South America for the weekend if they want to go for a vacation. So that's a different kind of scenario. Now, I believe if the world continues on its current path and people want these nicenesses and luxuries and experiences, it seems to me that this is what people want. This is scenario number A. But I'm suggesting that there's a whole range of things, and until we figure out what we want, we're all trying to solve a different problem. Over.
So I'm in the auto mechanic place. I can't even begin to grapple with any of that. And I on a certain fundamental level, don't have an interest in trying to figure any of that out. I'm more interested in, like, are there some fundamental moves that could really, like, move the dial? So the platform we wish we had that doesn't exist, if it's designed right, has a zero barrier to entry and has the ability to enable every single man, woman, and child on the planet to be connected and participatory.
Agreed. What's the governance model that that manages that?
There isn't. The platform is tools and affordances and functionalities, and only that, number one.
Who maintains that?
Hold on, it's distributed. So the infrastructure, the processing, the storage, all of the machinery of that is distributed. And it is planted like a seed, built and planted like a seed, and then allowed to ubiquitously spread on its own because of its enabling of people to be able to play, coming however they come, with whatever they do or don't know, whatever they do or don't have, however privileged or disenfranchised and challenged they are circumstantially, that a tool and a means and a mechanism. So at its most elaborate, it's an automated platform and generativity space that we do our alchemy in. And on the other end of the spectrum, it's a physical device with a biometric reader, wireless connectivity, and a button. That means a person can be identified relative to the global system, can have an account in the global system, can receive financial resource through the global system, can buy things, transact things, and have a voice in decision making and on a local level. And all of the affordances, all of the technological affordances that enable the platform to be ubiquitous are in process already. Don't have to worry about that. It's going to happen organically. Tesla is in the process of standing up satellite networks for universal, ubiquitous, free wireless connectivity. Others are heading in the same direction. All of the affordances and means and mechanisms to connect everybody. I don't project beyond setting that up as an idea and a goal, because from that point forward, local, individual, collective, holonic, and blended holons are going to get busy, and they're going to self-generate their own cure and meet their own needs and contribute on a commons and collective basis. If they're given the means to do that, they'll take it from there. I have no idea or interest or belief that I have any directive, power, authority, or control to define or dictate or plan or frame what their salvation is for them wherever they find themselves, whether it's a refugee or whether it's a billionaire and everything in between. So in connection with the build of the platform that doesn't exist that everybody needs, what I just described, only in connection with that, that is everything I've got, everything I've thought about, I'm looking to contribute, I'm looking to invite and pull in everybody and anybody else that's thought about the platform that doesn't exist that everybody needs. I'm looking to create a cohesive, holistic picture as the basis and starting point for identifying and integrating the moving parts, the applications and machinery and stuff that's been built and developed out there that can put wheels on it and make it work. And if it's distributed, there is no central provider.
So what I just heard actually requires a fairly intricate and complex and multiple stack set of agreements and protocols and, shall I say, governance models. Somebody had to decide that 60 hertz, AC was what was going to power these agreements. Somebody had to decide that, the prong into the wall was going to look a certain way. Somebody had to decide that ASCII versus EBCDIC versus, UTF-8 is going to be the way we encode information. So,
or all of them are going to need to be included because these chunks of the
and these are parts of the governance model. You can't just say there is no governance model. These are part of the governance model. So we have to figure out how that's
they're decision-making challenges,
exactly.
but decision-making as a collective and emergent phenomena, as and when the issues arise, if the underlying value is all for one for all, if there isn't proprietary and ownership interests, if there aren't ego elements introduced, if there aren't proprietary extensions or insecurities, if everybody, it's one for all and all for one, at least in connection with this particular undertaking, I believe it's foundational to our salvation. I think it's sort of the salvation answer to the Manhattan Project. If we can build that platform so that it meets everybody's needs, even the Facebooks and the Googles and all of the Goliaths of technology and the internet go pop. They're rendered obsolete. People will go where they're not getting exploited and where they're being served and facilitated in connecting with other people, creating with other people, and being valuable in the world.
Okay, at the risk of ping-ponging, let me also say that I like a lot of those objectives. I like a lot of those values. And to hook this back to the previous topic of open source and whether or not we're really open source or not, let me also observe, and you could disagree if you like, but observe that some of the most successful open source projects are not peer-driven process. They're centrally controlled processes. Someone had a vision. Someone vetted others and gave them responsibility to be able to check in code. Others are given responsibility to test. Others are given responsibility to document. But somewhere, somebody had a vision and others bought into that. And that buy-in was opt-in, but it was not flat. There's a clear hierarchy there. And I know that this strikes at the heart of much of what we talk about, but if we want to talk open source, let's observe that most open source projects, whether it's Linus Torvalds or Richard Stallman or somebody else, they were at the center. They had the vision. They controlled the vision. And others were either allowed to be vetted in or not to that process. For now, over.
Great frickin' question. Great question. So how do we meet that challenge? How do we do that differently? Because also some of the most successful open source projects for those people who were the fathers of, the originators of, also suffered because of that. Because the minute you set up that structure, you're creating the possibility of failure as a result of.
May I? I think Sam is not as much stating a structure as a principle. People are different, so we all have different qualities. And in different situations, I have more power, so to speak, or possibilities in that situation than anybody else just because of the situation and who I am in that situation. And so in other situations, I'm totally powerless. So power differences are a given. And I think it's also is there doubt there?
Well, I guess the lens I look at it through is not in terms of power, but in terms of like competence, expertise, knowledge. Like there are things I just am not I'm not suited to do, but I think there are also folks that are suited to make those decisions. And there may be many people that fall into that particular job title of we're the group on behalf of the whole that sorts out whether it's A or B at this particular fork. And because they're the ones most competent and most sophisticated in making the choice.
Okay, I think it's become more centered around what we need to discuss, in my opinion. I think people are different. Can we agree on that? Anybody disagree? Okay, so we are different. So we bring different qualities. Agreed? And then some qualities are more valuable in certain situations than others. Like I could be very good at cooking, but if I need to row the boat, that doesn't really help. So it's situational. Qualities have value in the situation. I think it's very important to discern that. Okay, if we agree on that, then okay. Some qualities give me more influence, whether I choose it or not in a given situation or not. If we are in a maze and I know the only one who knows the way out, everybody looks at me. And not because I want to be a leader or I have more, but I do have more power, if you could say so. It's not something to ignore at that point. That would be deadly, because we will be stuck because I don't have the right to decide or lead or take that competence in order to help. And I can use it either for the good or bad. That's choice as well. That's my choice, and it's your choice to accept that or not. So those differences are given to me, and I listened. I think about it daily, as I think you all do. How do we solve this conundrum? There are power differences, and I can abuse them to gain more power, and that grows exponentially. That's math, nothing to do. That's a given as well. So there will always happen at some point that there will be power differences, and there will always be someday, sooner or later, somebody taking advantage of that for their own good at the cost of the others. I think this is part of our problem. We cannot ignore that. I could go on, but I'll just leave it at that for the moment.
So I'd like to just touch back to Harry's question in terms of visioning into the future. If we can agree on how we talk about what it is that we're creating, which is going to require some specific words that include us connecting every person on the planet with the capacity to confirm their identity and be able to exchange with any other person. I've called this an identity wallet, just to plain language, its functionality. That this as a Manhattan project can create what we actually need, right? What we need is to be able to have us all connected, to be able to confirm our identity and exchange with one another. This tool or series of interoperable functions between systems that I think has the capacity to draw and pull a lot of people because it's obviously useful. In terms of, ways to, frame that project as something that is kind of a fun hackathon. What would it be? What are the minimum viable pieces to be able to create that context? So what would it be to create a Manhattan Project that was finding a way to get 10 units of currency to every human being on the planet. You know, as a project, it's possible. And it's something that I think, like, if you look at what's going on in the world, there's all kinds of players that are looking to create that. Why don't they have, you know, full adoption? Because it's extractive, because it's in the old frame. What's the new frame? How can we create the tools and as like a simple story of that can draw people to putting their pieces in? And I'll just note too that, you know, these ideas have been burning for a long time in me. And I notice when I express them that with this group, that I get a lot of pushback. So I don't feel that I have the runway to fully be in it because they're not being received. There's differences.
I do not understand one thing you're saying. I do listen. I want to understand. I'm not pushing you back, but I don't understand anything.
I, on the other hand, understand 1,000%, and this identity network is a foundation of what I used to call Program for the Future, which I've been looking to try and bring to this community for discussion, not as a brand, but as a concept. So I actually welcome your broach of this topic here, because yes, I agree with you. The systems that exist, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Apple, whether it's Amazon, they are profit-motivated entities. Our identities on those systems don't belong to us. Holochain is probably the first possibility where that could be true, but it still has to be built. So the minute we have an identity infrastructure that we each own, that we each control, that we each can trust, and we decide what goes in there and who gets to share it and who gets to only share for a while, and then we remove that right after a certain amount of time, you know, that, if we trust it, will pull people off of Facebook and Amazon and Google and Microsoft so fast, you know, it would be faster than MySpace disappearing, in my opinion. So I really agree with that. That is a foundational structural component of what needs to be built. Over.
And it needs guidelines how that is built and what is needed, because what Harry said, people, besides wanting to be connected and things like that, they still their basic needs like power, wanting to have power, and all kinds of things. Like in Facebook, they said, we are a platform like this, what you just described, Sam. They said it from the beginning, and now they realize that they forgot quite a bit to make it a platform like that, beyond the money part, but maybe also connected to making money through the advertisement and things like that. So there was an intertwining that misled to something that's not working anymore. And so we need to see that humankind is not always only good, but that there are power structures and ways of trying to influence and gaining power and things like that, that they are at work, and that we decide how that is going to be, how that will look like, that it really does what it's created for, and that it doesn't go off the rails after a while, because of money, because of people trying to overtake it and whatever. So,
and just a small augmentation to that, for that system to be truly trusted, it will necessarily need to be open source. Any proprietary code in there will be suspect. That's why Linux is a more trusted operating system than any other operating system out there.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
Okay.
And there are actually a couple of corollaries of that. And Holochain really sort of is what locked it in. Everything has to be distributed. Applications, all the functionalities have to be based on a completely distributed platform. If you have any consolidation of any of the moving parts in one place, you're busted. You're back at the old paradigm.
Distributed is a tricky notion there. The notion of resilience in that distributed. Distributed doesn't mean non-centralized. You know, the body's functions are distributed throughout the body, but still there are certain functions that are localized to certain parts of the body. And so if we take that metaphor, we still have to understand it in a slightly more nuanced way.
Okay, guys, I'm leaving you to sort this out and mail me with the solution, will you?
Let me also say, in addition to the identity infrastructure, I think there's a reality infrastructure. So I think I'm going to propose those as two different axes. There's the identity axis of people, then there's a reality axis. And that's the thing that actually says, this is what happened. It allows us to revisit past events, like being able to look at these recordings, like being able to navigate quickly to, what was it that Doug said about open source on this particular Tuesday? What is it that Sam said about Utopia on that particular Saturday? What is it that Tammy said about sharing media? You know, we have to be able to navigate that and essentially be able to relive it. Because I think that that substrate of whatever we want to call reality is what we construct other things from. So identity and reality, I think, are two of the fundamental, there might be a third, but these are at least two, I think, of the fundamental dimensions of what it is we want to build. And I'm not using a branded term there.
Like I hear right now.
What is that, Gertraud? I didn't get that, sorry.
Said that I look like she feels. What do you mean, Gertraud?
I need to go, or I want to go, and I feel a little bit exhausted the way the conversation went. Not so much the content, but this like trying to get it across and then almost fight it, not as a conflict, but as like, I need to get it across. And yeah, I just feel a little bit exhausted. And I don't know if the conversations are like that. So for me, it's a little bit different from the other conversations. And it's about something that needs to be created. And so it's about something. So I'm not judging that. I'm just telling where I am. And yeah. And it's been really interesting. And sometimes I was like, what? So, yeah. And there is, I don't know, Tammy, it's a cross that's what And I just wanted to address that.
Thank you. Yeah, I do feel sad, actually. It's a big investment, and it's frustrating not to be understood and received, and I'm not quite sure how to proceed.
So I think that's where the conversation could be focused, is we haven't yet figured out how to have barn raising conversations without feeling that disagreement feels uncomfortable. Personally, I don't feel that disagreement is uncomfortable, but I do get that some people might. I think that some amount of passion for holding one's ideas and trying to contribute those ideas is fine. I welcome it. But I think needs to be accompanied by a corresponding generosity of curiosity from all of us. And that's going to be hard if we're not saying, hey, this is just part of what we're here to do. If it feels wrong, then we're not going to come back and do it. To me, it does not feel wrong. To me, it feels like, now I really understand, what Tammy cares about. Now I really understand what Doug cares about. Hopefully some of you care now and understand what I care about. And now we get to put those pieces together in the next hopeful conversation. I think this is natural. And I've been waiting for this to happen, and I'm really happy it is happening. So if I'm sad that people think that this is not the right thing. To me, it feels like the right thing.
This is sort of the biggie. This is the biggie. Because, and there are communities and organizations that I touch that I think would count themselves at the most leading edge of priority of sensing and connecting in the human dimension. And notwithstanding that, there are still these embedded afflictions and attachments that touch the old paradigm in programming. And we were all like broken to that harness. And if all of those folks that have catalyzed the leading thinking movements of transformation in the world were to let go of their brands and let go of their ego investment from an identity marketing standpoint associated with the gifts they bring, what could they potentially collectively generate without the territoriality? And it's everywhere. It's freaking everywhere. It's everywhere. And I don't know how we transcend it.
Well, I think we just step up and do it. What I'm offering is I would like to offer what I have into this commons so that we can figure out how we can collectively manage some resources and test it. We've all got a lot to put in the center here. What is it when we put our collective intelligence and and I want to include some actual things so that we can be testing that model and figuring it out, because there's a lot of value here. And where I think that in some of the ways that I've characterized my experience, because I am pushing towards real world value, I'm only one very simple example of a person that needs to eat. I'm not asking for this group to support me. I'm asking for us to collectively contribute into something that is of value to all of us and of value to the greater whole. And so, you know, Doug, when you talk about what you're up to, it's exactly the same thing that I've been up to for 20 years. But you and I can't even get on the same page. The problem. And that makes me deeply, deeply sad. I love you. You've helped me a lot. I would like for you to be able to receive what I'm giving and not just push back and argue. That's how I feel.
I get that. I get that. And
can you bring a different energy?
Bring a different energy in connection with which piece?
With me and what I'm bringing to the table. Can you be curious about it? Can you ask questions rather than say how within your system that's just a no-go? Because that's a stopping point for me.
Well, in fairness, I've been in service to all of the pieces of your puzzle, and we put on the boards a conversation about your vision in terms of the D Corp, and it's on a to-do list. And my pushback here is that this is like platform building space and time. And if we're going to go into D Corp and Tammy Vision time again, and it's an again for me, that's not something I'm prepared to do in this format. It doesn't work for me. I have profound challenges around a meme that starts with the word corporation. And all that it has wrapped into it. And I'm an attorney, so the meaning of that is even quadruply loaded. So I'm absolutely willing to go there with you, but it's challenging if it's going to wash out everything else. If that is a piece of this landscape, for me, there are a lot of moving pieces of the puzzle, and I try to keep them sort of straight in service to figuring out what the it is in each one of these contexts. And I don't know how to respond to that need that you're expressing around that meme here in a way that would be helpful, unless we want to make the conversation here about D Corp until we've gotten to a place on it. And it's not that I'm not open to getting to some resolution, but
well, it's just a starting point in a conversation of what is the deconstruction of what the what the corporation has been. What are the pieces that we can, I want to have that conversation. It's not creating a new corporation, Doug.
I have no problem having that conversation. That wasn't the expectation.
But that's fundamental to this space for me. For me,
well, I get that.
The commons is a decorporation for me. You know, I would like to be able to explore how we deconstruct the corporate scenario and actually functionally create the pieces of the commons. That's what it is. So it's not.
Okay. Well, then let that be the starting place for the next round, and we'll stay with it until it's done.
I actually think there's some triggering words here. I hear that corporation as a word is triggering, Doug. And if we can choose to talk about what we like and what we don't like, about what it is that we think corporations mean, maybe we can figure out a different word. But I think more importantly for me is we each here believe that we are wanting to be collaborative. And we each here, I believe, think that each of the others is collaborative and wants to be collaborative. So if we can figure out how to get through these conversations, there's hope. Because I think if we can't figure out how to get through these conversations, some of the most, we believe, well-intentioned, privileged in some sense, loving, generous, creative, listening people, if we can't do this, I'm going to go get that little shovel and I'm going to go find a hill. I'm going to dig a small cave because if we can't do it, I don't know who can. We've got to do this.
And I think we can. I think we can. You know, chaos.
We have to let go of triggers like corporation as a word. You know, we have to figure out how to use words so that we're not getting triggered and how to look at what's underneath that word about what we want. You know, the D is the DE, right? It's the uncorporation. It's the anti-corporation. It's not the corporation that we're trying to go after. It's not a D hyphen corporation in the sense of a B corporation, right? It's the new thing that we want to create. And maybe using the word corporation is too triggering, you know? So let's figure out whether it's a village, you know, which sounds more.
But it triggers in the right way because it's
exactly. So long as we don't leave. So long as we're still engaged and curious and generous and listening. So Doug,
I think that was sorry.
Sorry, Gertraud.
No, I interrupted you.
You go first. No? Anyway, Doug, I was going to invite you, Doug, to see if we might be able to do Doug differently so that you sort of let go a bit. I mean, you may know completely that the open source nature of the conversation is right, but can we at least still be curious enough to have a conversation that brings others to your position, if indeed that's the way the conversation goes, rather than just bringing it in as a completed thought into the pool of meaning without possibility for kind of constructing that notion for those who want to go through that derivation.
I'm not assertive in the picture of the belief I have vis-a-vis the barn. I'm not coming from a place of convincing anybody. The conversation that we left off last week and that I wanted to pick up on was, as a practical matter, can we come to this space, this place, and this particular piece of the puzzle from a place of contribution? Because if we trigger legal and we trigger IP and we trigger business, I'm capable of going there. I'm as creative a structural guy as there is in the business. I don't see us getting to a finish line.
Those are all three of my key and core contributions are in those areas, Doug. So when you say you don't want to have those conversations, that shuts me out.
No, I didn't say I didn't want to have those conversations. I said I didn't see those elements as part of this task, building a platform.
That's the platform that I'm looking to build around, because those are my contributions.
When you say those are your contributions,
intellectual value, social value, these are all things that point to, in old world intellectual property, I have new innovations and pieces around that. That's my contribution, are specifically in the areas of transforming intellectual property, in contributing around an identity wallet, in creating contexts for people to be able to share knowledge and build a knowledge commons.
Okay. So I'm sort of sub that in terms of the platform, because I'm just trying to figure out the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of enabling people to have a wallet. I'm not even like, I have no problem with what gets done on top of it. I'm trying to get more primitive than that. And if we can't separate the tool, building the tool from what the tool is going to be used for, then it gets really challenging to even get out of the starting gate, because part of what the tool is going to be used for, the reality of that with the affordances of the platform and tools that we're proposing doesn't even exist yet. So I'm not even quite sure how we would project into that. And if we're bringing the old IP constructs into informing the design process, then we're playing the past forward. So what's the chicken, what's the egg?
Nothing is. It's a reimagining of the whole thing, Doug. And when we create these tools and platforms, there's intellectual value embedded in it. We can't get away from the conversation.
So we're proprietizing it.
No, we are not.
Okay. What am I missing here? When you say,
Doug, can I try?
yeah, please.
Please.
What I'm hearing is, I'm hearing a request to have the conversation about what it is that could be the new form of a corporation, or the new form of value, or the new
collective stewardship, or
yeah. I mean, we use old values, but we put new in front of it to say, hey, what of it can be co-created by us in a new way? So when I or Tammy hears that a starting position for you is, these are things which are not going to work, kind of like statement, X, Y, Z, not going to work, right? Then that doesn't really invite a conversation around those points.
Can we be specific?
Yeah, you just said the three things were just not part of the solution, right? And Tammy said
I didn't say they weren't part of the solution. I said,
we were not going to get.
Do they have to be part of figuring out what the build is?
Right.
We're talking about creating a tool. So do those things need to be answered in order to design a tool?
But why not have that conversation, right? Because we've already had some notion around different notions of ownership, different notions of decision making, different notions of identity. So why can't we discuss every noun or object in our world in a new way? But to say that if we go there, we're not going to get to a solution, shuts down conversation in those areas.
Gotcha. Okay. So here's where I think the cognitive dissonance came in for me. I look at the platform as a mechanical device enabling all of those new forms to be figured out and developed collectively. There isn't a tool or means to figure them out for most people. It's a very sort of elite conversation frame to delve into those topics today. And the people that inform those conversations that I would have at the table are why I'm focused on getting them into the conversation, right? Chicken and egg sort of deal. the reason I'm sort of trying to separate building the enabling platform from the substance of ownership and IP and all of that in its creation is because it's a straw man I've spent 30 years, dicking around in and making a living on in terms of who owns what and who vests in what and who controls what and decision making and ownership and authority and control and all of those memes. And the only sense I have of the established order is they're not working. There are emergences of pointing toward new in terms of Creative Commons, in terms of expressions of different schemas oriented toward IP. But I'd like to figure out how to enable the emergence of the answers to those questions as an emergent reality of people creating. And if we have to figure that out to figure out how we're framing up the platform build itself and the contributions of however many people and companies and software and open source and whatever that would create this mosaic, it's what comes first.
For me, there are two things that stick out of that conversation. One is listening to you. I tap into whatever ownership, IP, what corporate. We tap into something where you're anti. So it's kind of, we don't know where the trigger points are in using our language in order to try to find out how to talk about it. So it's like this trying to, and we just have the words we have, and maybe it's about creating new ones, but
well, let's turn the table. Let's turn the telescope. What do those words mean for you? Because obviously the three of you have a sense of something that I'm not getting. Tell me what those terms and those domains mean to you. What's your vision of those?
I'm not even that far. I'm not even saying it's exactly this. So when I listen to Tammy to say uncorporation, then I'm just thinking, okay, this is something that corporations is not, but I'm not triggered by the word per se, and I can understand why you are. I have that feeling that it's already set, it's already done for you. And so
if I don't understand what the construct is, it isn't. But I need to understand what the it is in uncorporation.
So I can.
Second part before we just go into that, and the second part is when I listen to you to say, okay, just let's do that platform. I think things get created when we have a vision, a space in which into which we live. So for me, just making a platform and then figuring out what we use it for, this is not inspiring. So for me, I need some of those conversations first, not to make it fixed and it can't change, and I think it's an evolutionary process. But without it, it's just, it could be another Facebook. There's no inspiration for me in that. When you say, let's just do that. And maybe I don't understand exactly what Tammy said, but there is kind of a vision how to use it good for, and that can change over time. But to pluck that first takes the inspiration out for me. And I could see Tammy's face in that as well. So I would like to have that conversation, to create that space where we say, yes, that's something we want. And then let's see the mechanics and invite people, and they might evolve with us in that. So.
Yeah, if I may, weeks ago, I think it was even Tammy who introduced a way to have the conversation, which was use case driven. If we're use case driven around what people want to do, and I believe, Doug, you also, I think, are aligned with this, as far as I understand you, okay, this is a way for us to describe what we each want to be able to do, because you say, hey, each person needs to be able to interact with this thing the way they want, right? And then we can figure out what the technology is at any given moment, okay? And at any given moment, it's going to be imperfect, but every iteration is going to improve on that, driven by our use cases and what we can do with this thing, okay? So yes, I'm preaching Agile here, but I strongly believe that it's a way, and it's a good way, in my opinion, of how we prototype and build systems. And it's also a co-evolutionary way, right? As we figure out what we want to do, the tool evolves. As the tool evolves, we get to do new things. As we do new things, we figure out what's the better way to do new things, and then improve the tool. And I do this spiraling gesture many times. You're probably all doing this by now internally, okay? But I want to make sure that we do this in such a way that even those of us who have been spending 20 or 30 years of us, and there are many like that, okay, who have looked at questions and written 10,000 pages of notes and know for darn sure that statement XYZ has got to be the way it is, okay? I've got a zillion of them, okay? Tammy knows. But if we don't introduce them in a way that lets others understand, then we're our own ivory tower. And that's one of the reasons I don't want to plop down a 30-page specification and say, this is what we want to build, right? It's going to take you guys months to even figure it out, much less have zero willingness to do so. But if we're all engaged in this and say, hey, these are the use cases, I want to manage my identity, I want to manage my wallet, I want to be able to share it with you, I want to be able to transact with you, I want to be able to send you a rug, I want to be able to get a piece of pottery from you, all these sort of things. And I want to be able to control it. I don't want anybody else to control it. Let's start with those simple use cases. And another dimension of use cases, which is I want to be able to let anybody be able to drop into anytime I make a statement about coevolution. Boom, there's 6 different instances where Sam talked about coevolution in these 120 different videos. And oh, by the way, here's the 3 in which Doug had a reaction. Okay, so let's figure out how to navigate that. So those are 2 dimensions that I would gravitate towards. And I think I said, let me just close with one statement, because I love science fiction. I even love writing science fiction, right? I think this is a theme I tried to introduce before. So this is the stage where we can write science fiction. This is how the world is going to work if we had our way. This is what I would do with a system. This is what somebody else would do. This is what the world would look like. This is what I would be afforded, all those sort of things. That's what we can do. And that's a creative process that must happen, I think, before we actually get into implementation. And I think that's what I'm hearing us have a curiosity about, is how do we start that science fiction conversation? So we imagine this, town we're building on the 8th continent, the cyber world. And we're now starting to build a little outpost there, or a little general store, or a little apartment building, What is that science fiction story that we can construct together? That's where I'd like to see us go. Rather than, seeing this and having people, sit back and wonder whether or not they're going to be back next week. Over.
I want to get to work, and I want to feel like I'm received by each of you. And this is the human parts that are a little more difficult. Like, I feel pushed back and pushed away from this conversation, not drawn in and inspired to contribute. And I got to do my own work in terms of that, you know, but at the same time, this is a piece of group work, where we all have to receive each other and figure out how to do that well. So I this one, and, you know, have a look at where things went awry, or things got passionate, or whatever way you want to look at it. Because yeah, I've been doing my best to rewatch stuff, and it's incredibly valuable, because we need to actually learn from ourselves and how we present. In watching these, I was able to really understand that, and be able to articulate today when people are showing me with their facial expressions that they're not receiving me, that I can't share in a way that can be held and heard, because it's a whole system. I'm embedded in it. I can see it's not being received. The energy is not within me to be able to articulate in a way that it's just a devolving spiral. And so, you know, like, essentially in these spaces, I've been continuing to just be a contributor, be generous, listen, explore. I've been modeling what it is that I need to experience myself. And I think that there's learning in that for all of us. And I feel some tears. I feel some sadness around how this goes and how this went today, because I don't want to be in battle. I don't want to battle. I want to gift. I want to give. I want to share. I want to be received. I want to be in a team of people who support each other and is demonstrating that in action. And there's some cleaning up that we need to do, I think, around that, and some self-reflection, myself included.
If I might just ask, if there's any amount of that, let me ask it differently. What would be a good place to start from, assuming we're at 9 o'clock next week? What would be a good way to start that conversation?
For some reason, I'm not really understanding what you're saying, Sam.
In other words, I don't want to lose what we actually are feeling or learning right now, but I also want to know how we take advantage of it and kind of start or launch a conversation next Tuesday in a collaborative, constructive, co-creating way.
I mean, I would suggest that we do review this and share our thoughts about it. And because part of it is integrating the actual learning, right? The way that we speak to each other is, you know, and it's real. It's part of how that strata of reality is hitting our group. It's like there's the reality of what it is that we're doing and how we're speaking to each other, right, and how we miss each other. So I think that there's some good considerations around that we can get to if we do the review.
Even if we don't do it, there's probably a few other people who will be, since these videos are shared.
And recognizing that it is work.
Yes.
For me, Tuesdays don't work very well. So mostly I have coaching sessions. So or how much I can be here. So it was like I was like in the middle. So I'm grateful. I think it was the right thing to come in, and yeah, if I may, I thought also for the other group I would like to introduce some ways of talk together. Yeah, I found it very interesting. I mean, like getting the energy, because I didn't understand every word you said. Fun, each of you. So I'll see. And I thought it was interesting enough that I considered to come back, but I cannot promise. Yeah, sometimes I just have.
Thanks for your presence and your questions too.
Yeah, your contribution was terrific. And now,
Thank you. Actually, I wrote it down last on Sunday. I just had those 4 keys not working, and so I couldn't even put in my password. So it was 1 Q, A, and Y in the German keyboard, and it was like it's still not working, and I had to the doctors. But that was the reason I was sitting here, but I couldn't get in. So sorry for that. I had to wait till I get a keyboard.
We missed you.
Yeah, so have a wonderful day, evening, no, all day. I have my evening here. So all the best, and see you on Thursday.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gertraud.
Doug, thoughts?
yeah, I mean, I'll definitely watch back. I want to get to I want to get to a place of understanding of what this piece of the puzzle is, Tammy, for you. Because obviously I haven't gotten it yet. And it's not that I'm not coming from a place of curiosity. We'll just have to keep at it until I do. But I'm open to do that.
And maybe we can have some help in our session, so it's not just a back and forth between you and I.
No, we haven't really had a back and forth about this one yet. It was on the list. So, either way, whatever you're feeling.
Great. Some progress.
Chaos is part of the deal. It just is. Because human beings are human beings. And getting to the far side of it is what matters. But you can't fake getting to the far side of it. And you can't slip backwards into sort of pseudo everything's cool. It's like you have to get through it. And so this is that. It certainly can suck. But it's also so we'll get to the far side. I have faith.
Me too.
I don't mind things falling apart as long as they fall together, So I'm hoping that we all stick with it so that we can do that.
That's what we're here for.
We, the larger we.
Figure out how to do that. Yeah.
I mean, I
Okay.
can't tell you how disappointed I would be if we, quote unquote, fail at this. That'd be one of the biggest disappointments in my life.
It's a really big, I relate to it mortally. I don't relate to this as academic or casual.
Exactly.
And I don't
life
relate
and
to
death
it.
situation here.
I believe that, and I don't believe we have a choice. So we will figure it out.
Remember that poll that got put up there? Maybe incorrectly or correctly, I said, I'm not quitting, okay?
Yeah.
I think some of you said you're not quitting, so I'm not.
Gertraud, what was it you just said?
The back door is closed.
That's right.
Yes.
And the windows.
In it to win it.
Yep.
For everyone.
I guess there's another part of that, till death do we part, right?
And then not even then.
And taking the sense of that's a very, I mean, this is like a very sophisticated or high level thing to really be in it and really want to make a difference without that urgency. And I think that's not so easy.
It's a different way of expressing that urgency. Any last closing jokes? Two collaborologists enter a bar. Okay, now finish the sentence. Anyway, I don't have the punchline yet.
Okay, we'll build that too.
Okay. All right. So,
Thanks,
bye
everyone.
for now. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.